Burgess writes in Little Wilson and Big God, being the first part of the Confessions of Anthony Burgess, and also in memoir he wrote about Bamber Bridge.
At the end of the last war, the British government, faced with a great shortage of primary school teachers, initiated a scheme short-lived but useful, that of giving to ex-servicemen and women a 30-month course in educational theory and practice, as well as potted studies in academic subjects. It was as a lecturer in speech and drama that in 1948 I went to Bamber Bridge Emergency Training College in the Ribble Valley of South Lancashire, England. Though a Lancashireman, born in Manchester, I knew little of the rural portions of a largely rural county. The little town, or large village, of Bamber Bridge was on the railway that linked the town of Preston with the Irish Sea, a place that had known cotton mills during the time of the Great Cotton Boom, but was now becoming a dormitory town. 5 pubs, 1 butcher, a cooperative store, a British Legion club, that slept workers and their wives who gained their bread from the industries of Preston and Chorley and Mayland. Bamber Bridge, like other towns of the region, had its fish and chip shops and pie and tripe and cow heel emporia, and these fed the populace on working days. Add to these rough delicacies Lancashire specialities like black puddings, Eccles cakes, Bakewell tarts, jam puffs, and baked custards in crusty pastry, and you had a cuisine not to be despised. The king of northern dishes, Lancashire hot pot, was essentially a feast for the household. Best end of lamb's neck, potatoes, onions, cooked slowly in stock in the oven, and it came into its own at the striking of the midnight which brought in the new year. The day before New Year's Day, the Feast of the Circumcision, was traditionally a day on which meat could not be eaten, but the hot pot could be approached on the first chime of the New Year bell. You missed committing the sin of non-abstinence by a mere second, hence the meal was known as the Devil's Supper. The hot pot was always served with pickled red cabbage and washed down with beer and strong tea. No tea is stronger than that brewed in the northwest. Only last week I was staying in the Park and Meridian Hotel in New York, and my breakfast tea consisted of a jug of tepid water with a couple of tea bags on the side. This, to a Lancashireman, is rank heresy. There are few Lancastrians who cannot stand and give, however amateurishly, a song or dance or monologue. Coming from this tradition, father a musical pianist, mother a singer and dancer, the beautiful Belle Burgess, I fell back easily into it, playing the piano in pubs and clubs. Instructors, even in training colleges, were ill paid in those days, and I was happy to be paid 35 shillings every weekend to play in the evenings in the Red Lion. On the lid of the piano, pints of beer, far more than I could drink, were placed by appreciative customers. My playing the piano at weekends in the Black Bull wasn't considered decorous, but apart from free beer and 35 shillings a week, I was interested in the village community, which was of a kind that perhaps no longer exists. One Saturday evening in the Black Bull, when I was pounding the piano, Lynn and Harry Chapman entered together. This was a great moment for the scandal lovers, and the untrue story went round long after that I had struck up Jealous Heart, a popular song of the time. The college was housed in a former US Army camp. Students dwelt in single rooms in blocks, and at the end of each block there was a tiny flat for a lecturer and his family, its rent paid for by the duties of block tutor. Lynn and I, married for 6 years, were now able to set up home for the first time. Real meals and our own bed sheets. These were what our marriage needed. After a brief riot in London with, respectively, her lovers and my mistress, we settled to fidelity and the comforts of the domestic life. Such college life as was offered, the whist drive, the Sunday evening on denominational service, Lynn and I avoided. The social life of marriage was best conducted in pubs. Its more intimate side went well in the tiny flat, though its sounds penetrated through the thin walls to the student quarters. Rows were listened to judicially by these students, the married among whom knew all about rows. The students would sometimes join in the family life, bringing hares for jugging or farm eggs for frying. It wasn't a bad life. Lynn had got over her ailment and had been restored to the slim blonde beauty of her student days. Her mother had sent us the family piano. We bought a Siamese cat and had a border collie bitch wished upon us. We were to avoid, on doctor's orders, the making of a human family. We had, for the moment, family enough in the mature students we had to look after. We were settled.
Burgess provides an explanation of the richness of the talent in the northwest of England. He writes as follows.
I ascribe it to the fact that the Northwest resisted the Reformation and, maintaining its Catholicism, was cut off from the preferment that only high education can give. Proscribed by law until 1829 from going to a university, a Northwestern Catholic couldn't become a lawyer or a doctor. If he had talent and imagination, his only professional outlet was the stage, either classical or popular, usually popular. The seaside resort, catering to the masses, is a Northwestern invention, one of the fruits of the Industrial Revolution. And marine paradises, like Blackpool and Southport, have always had a large need for entertainers. You see this in the hinterland, Bamber Bridge, for example, and there are few Lancastrians who can't stand and give, however amateurishly, a song or dance or monologue. There was a lot of song in the 7 pubs of Bamber Bridge and in the British Legion. For this was the northwest of England, the cradle of British popular entertainment, with Blackpool not far away. It was also a region which the Reformation had barely touched. Nearby Preston was, etymologically, Priest's Town. Country pubs had statues of the Sacred Heart or the Virgin Mary in the saloon bar. In my classes there were men with a variety of regional accents. The question was whether to recommend, rather than enforce, the adoption of the neutral southeastern accent, which too many of them associated with privilege. Yes, but was it in order to take a northern accent to a southern school? It was best for me to be scientific and teach a course in general phonetics, showing how speech sounds were made and how they could be unambiguously notated. There wasn't any trouble with the consonants. With the vowels and diphthongs, the Pygmalion class element began to enter. There was a sound that southeastern speakers used in love, and a sound they used in bull. In Lancashire and Yorkshire, the two sounds were levelled under an intermediate one, shown in the International Phonetic Alphabet as an inverted M. What were these northerners going to do in a Croydon or Hounslow school? Impose their compromise phoneme as a norm? Free fights nearly broke out, with consideration of the R in southeastern Bath, the real badge of vocal privilege. The thing to do was to get some of these students acting, using dialectology as a conscious tool. The standard speech of the BBC was merely one of the dialects. Bamber Bridge primarily interested me because it was an example of a community totally satisfied with itself and of a culture pretty well self-sufficient. It was easy enough to get to the cinema or theatre in Preston or Chorley by bus or train, but it was more satisfactory to make one's own entertainment in the pub or the British Legion Hall, the British Legion being a society of ex-servicemen who kept alive the community spirit and accumulated sparse funds to help the needy. The whole of the northwest of England is a source of national popular entertainment, though a lot of it stays home. There wasn't much of an influx of strangers, except German prisoners of war, who seemed to the Brigg lads and lasses to speak a kind of exceptionally broad Lancashire. The strangers who got on best were the American blacks, who were there during the war. These were tough-minded soldiers who revolted against their white comrades and waged the Battle of Bamber Bridge, well remembered in the local annals, but not, as far as I know, recorded in the bigger chronicles of the Second World War. When the local pubs were asked to initiate a colour bar, the innkeepers responded with notices saying, "Black Yanks only." The emergency training scheme of which I became a part was set up by the Ministry of Education to provide teachers quickly and cheaply for schools that were responding to a rising birth rate. It was a very sensible scheme, drawing as it did on ex-servicemen who had already shown some instructional talent in the forces and felt they had a teaching vocation. These were given a year's intensive training in such basic subjects as were taught in primary schools, and were also permitted to specialise on a more academic level if they showed aptitude for secondary school work. Thus I found myself teaching the history of European drama as a so-called special subject, the techniques of drama production at a subsidiary level, and the art of speech as an aspect of basic instructional training. The men were mature, and many had suffered. They had seen the world and did not take kindly to a geography course taught by a man who knew it only from books. They could not be disciplined in the manner of schoolboys. Most had wives, the rest found mistresses they imported for occasional nights into their bedroom studies. These had to be flushed out with gentle words. There had to be some kind of order, especially as the principal of the college was an evangelical lay preacher. I was younger than many of my students, and certainly had enjoyed lower service rank than many of them. One had been a brigadier. If I was to prevail over them, it was through the virtue of knowledge. We were settled, also unsettled. I reached 30 without finding a permanent post. Every Friday, the Times educational supplement was delivered, and I read only the back pages, which advertised jobs. The work of answering advertisements was a profession in itself. University posts demanded 8 copies of one's curriculum vitae, which meant importing a typewriter and a primitive copying machine. I travelled for interviews and always came home defeated. Army service had conferred no real experience. Teaching army students wasn't considered much of a qualification. I had to compete with men who had been reserved into teaching and had become MAs. 2 years of instruction of tough adults with no new paper qualifications wasn't fitting me for anything. A tough people who went their own way, kept a dour sense of humour in all circumstances, and always contrived to enjoy life. The lads and lasses of the Brigg have probably by now succumbed to the mondial plastic culture, which is killing our old folkways and rendering travel to foreign parts a waste of time. I travel back to Bamber Bridge only in my head. Sometimes I wonder if I invented the place. But the name is still there on the map, a name denoting a locality which probably has more in common with Springfield, Mass, or Trenton, NJ, than what one used to think of as Merry England. The Brigg folk have probably been supermarketed and computerised and televised out of merriment.